I used to spend most of my summers outdoors. I was not much of a beach or pool person. For me, freedom was found in climbing. There was this forested region about an hour and a half outside my hometown in Washington state, near a quiet rural area that barely had a cell signal. The forest stretched for miles in all directions, and tucked away inside it were clusters of massive boulders that climbers like me loved to challenge ourselves on. It became a tradition for me and 3 friends, named Jordan, Leah, and Marcus, to head out there several times each summer. We would bring our climbing gear, food, and tents, and spend entire weekends just bouldering, exploring, and sleeping under the stars. Camping there also saved us time and gas money. Once you hiked in with all your gear, the idea of heading back to town for the night felt like more trouble than it was worth. And honestly, there was something kind of freeing about being completely surrounded by nature with no one else around for miles. On one of our trips, I think it was the 3rd or 4th time we had camped in that spot, something strange happened. That night, Leah left her climbing gear outside her tent before going to sleep. We had all eaten together by the campfire, then retreated to our separate tents, and I remember distinctly seeing her rucksack and climbing shoes resting just beside her tent flap. She also had a small bucket of chalk powder for her hands, which she had set right next to the bag. The next morning, they were gone. At first, we thought maybe she had just moved them, but Leah swore she had not. She got up early, checked everywhere, and even retraced her steps back to the boulders we had climbed the day before. Nothing. Her climbing shoes, a couple of shirts, and the chalk bucket had completely vanished. We were a little unsettled, but we did not want to admit the obvious. That someone else had been in our camp while we were sleeping felt too creepy and honestly too unlikely. We were in the middle of nowhere. Who would even be out here? Instead, we told ourselves maybe she had accidentally left them somewhere near the boulders and an animal dragged them off. It did not exactly make sense. What would an animal want with climbing shoes? But it was easier to believe than thinking a stranger had crept into camp in the middle of the night. We shrugged it off, finished our weekend, and did not talk about it much afterward. A year later, we returned to the same camping spot. By now, the strange disappearance of Leah's gear had become more of a weird story we laughed about around the fire. We would joke about the forest raccoon with expensive taste in climbing equipment. That night, after a long day of climbing, we sat around the fire, eating a late dinner. The forest around us was a black wall of trees, our only light coming from the flickering flames. The air was cool, and the sounds of crickets and distant owls filled the gaps between our conversations. At one point, I told the group I needed to go take a leak. There was a small trail just beyond the tents that led a few yards deeper into the forest, and I figured it would give me some privacy. The firelight faded as I walked, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. I stepped off the path a little, found a spot, and that was when I noticed something. At first, I thought it was just a weird shape on the ground, maybe a fallen log covered in moss. But then I realized it was moving just slightly. Someone was lying on their stomach in the leaves. My brain took a few seconds to register what I was seeing. The person was dressed head to toe in a full ghillie suit, the kind snipers wear, covered in strips of fabric and netting to blend into the forest floor. Their face was obscured, but their head was tilted upward, pointed directly at our campsite. They were not just passing through, they were watching us. I froze. My heart started pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I did not move, did not say a word, I just stared. After what felt like forever, the man slowly turned his head toward me. Even though I could not see his face, I knew he had seen me. For a brief second, we locked eyes, or at least, I think we did. Then, without a word, he scrambled to his feet and bolted into the trees. He moved fast, faster than I thought anyone could in that kind of suit. Within seconds, the sound of his footsteps faded into the distance. I stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My legs felt weak, but eventually I forced myself to walk back to camp. When I got to the fire, my friends noticed immediately that something was wrong. I told them exactly what I had seen, my voice shaking. For a while, we just sat there, in silence, all of us trying to process it. The rest of the night was tense. We stoked the fire higher than usual, kept our gear close, and took turns staying awake in shifts. Nothing else happened, but none of us slept well. We did not know if it was connected to the incident the year before, but looking back, it is hard not to wonder. Maybe Leah's gear had not been taken by an animal. Maybe someone had been out there the whole time, watching us. We never went back to that spot again. It has been years since then, but sometimes when I am camping, I find myself looking at the tree line, wondering if someone might be lying there in the dark, just far enough away to be invisible, but close enough to see everything. I have always been a night owl. When the rest of the world is asleep, I like to go for long walks through my neighborhood. There is something peaceful about the streets being completely empty, the air cooler, and the quiet broken only by the sound of your own footsteps. I have seen a few odd things here and there, but most of the time, nothing unusual happens. That changed a couple of months ago. It was a little after 1:30 in the morning when I decided to go out. The streets were deserted, as they usually are at that hour. The glow from the street lamps cast long shadows on the pavement. Every so often, I would hear the faint hum of a car somewhere far away, but mostly it was just stillness. I walked aimlessly for a while, following the same general route I usually take. After about 30 minutes, I decided to head home. I turned down one of the quieter streets, the kind lined with older houses and dim porch lights. That was when I noticed a black van driving slowly past me. At first, I did not think much of it. Maybe someone who lived nearby was coming home late. The van turned a corner and disappeared from sight, and I kept walking. A few minutes later, I reached another intersection, and that was when I saw it again. The same black van was coming down the street toward me. This time, I felt a small flicker of unease. I told myself it could still be a coincidence. Maybe they had just looped around the neighborhood for some reason. I walked a little faster. My eyes kept flicking over my shoulder, checking for headlights. 10 minutes later, the van came by again. There was no mistaking it now. It had no license plates. The realization made my stomach tighten. Whoever was driving was circling the area, and they had taken the time to remove their plates or cover them up. That was not the behavior of someone who was just lost or looking for an address. I picked up my pace. My house was still a good 15 minutes away, and the streets between here and there were not well lit. I decided that if I saw the van again, I was not going to keep walking in a straight line toward home. It did not take long. The van reappeared, but this time it slowed to a stop a few houses ahead of me. The engine rumbled softly in the quiet, the headlights casting pale beams across the street. I froze. The thought of walking past it made every instinct in me scream to turn around. I did. I spun on my heel and walked back the way I came, my pace increasing with every step. The sound of my shoes hitting the pavement seemed too loud. I made the first turn I could, then another, trying to put distance between myself and the van. The streets were unfamiliar now, but I did not care. I just needed to get out of sight. I passed a row of houses with high fences and found a narrow gate slightly ajar. Without thinking, I slipped inside and crouched low behind the fence. The night felt colder all of a sudden. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I held my breath and listened. About a minute later, I heard the low rumble of the van again. The sound grew louder, and then the black shape of it rolled down the street I had just left. The headlights swept past the fence where I was hiding, casting a brief glow across the wood before moving on. I stayed perfectly still. The van slowed slightly, almost as if the driver was looking for me. Then it kept going. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I still did not move. Every so often, I thought I heard an engine in the distance, but I could not be sure. It was almost 20 minutes before I decided to risk leaving. I slipped out from behind the fence and kept to the shadows as I made my way back toward familiar streets. I stayed alert the whole way, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. When I finally saw my house, I did not even bother with the front door. I went straight to the side, climbed in through my bedroom window, and locked it behind me. I stood there for a while, just listening, half expecting to hear the van outside. It never came back. I do not know who was driving that van, or what their intentions were. Maybe they were just trying to scare me, or maybe they were waiting for the right moment to do something worse. What unsettles me most is knowing how close they came to stopping near me, and how alone I was out there at that hour. I still go for late night walks sometimes, but not as often as I used to. And if I see the same car twice in one night, I go straight home. I have always loved camping in remote places. The further away from civilization, the better. Something about being completely cut off from the rest of the world has always been appealing to me. My friends felt the same way. That is how we ended up spending a weekend camping deep in the backcountry of Colorado. This spot was far from anything resembling a town. To get there, we had to drive for over an hour down a narrow Forest Service road. The further we went, the more isolated it felt. The road was rough, winding through dense trees and steep hillsides. We passed no one along the way. Out there, if a car came by, you would hear it long before you saw it. At night, you could see headlights from miles away. It was not the kind of place where someone could sneak up unnoticed. There were 8 of us in total, spread across 3 vehicles. We found a perfect campsite off the road, surrounded by trees with just enough open space for our tents and a fire pit. Once we arrived, we settled in quickly, unloading gear and getting dinner started. As the sun went down, we sat around the fire, eating and talking. The air cooled quickly, the warmth from the flames mixing with the faint smell of pine and wood smoke. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet you only get when you are far from any city. After we finished eating, we cleaned up the area to avoid attracting wildlife. The plan was to check our cars before heading to our tents for the night. Our vehicles were parked about 30 yards from the fire, just far enough that you could not see them clearly in the dark. We walked up the short path toward them, our flashlights cutting through the night. That was when we noticed something strange. The first person to reach the cars stopped and said, "What the hell happened to my tire?" We gathered around. The front right tire of his SUV was completely flat. At first, I thought maybe he had driven over something earlier in the day, but then someone else pointed out their own car. Same thing. Front right tire, completely deflated. It only took a few more seconds to realize that all 3 of our cars had the exact same problem. The front right tires had been slashed. The cuts were clean, deliberate. A single slice on the sidewall of each one. You could tell it was done with a sharp blade, probably a box cutter or a similar tool. At first, some people thought maybe it was a prank, but there was no laughter, no nervous grins. The more we looked at it, the more the reality sank in. This was not some harmless joke. Someone had done this intentionally, and if someone had done it, that meant they had been here. None of us had seen or heard a single person all day. The road was quiet. You could hear an engine from far away. But a quiet hiss from a tire being punctured would be impossible to notice from where we were sitting around the fire. The thought that someone had been near our camp without us knowing made my stomach drop. It was like realizing too late that you had left your front door wide open in the middle of the night. Panic started to set in. People were glancing into the dark trees around us, suddenly aware of how exposed we were. Out here, there was no cell service. If whoever had done this was still nearby, we would have no quick way of calling for help. Luckily, all 3 cars had spare tires. Even so, the situation was tense. One of the guys in our group had brought a handgun for protection, and he stood watch while the rest of us worked on changing the tires. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind, made us freeze and look around. The forest, which had felt so calming earlier, now seemed oppressive, as if the trees themselves were hiding whoever had done this. We worked as fast as we could, but even with all of us helping, it took time. I kept imagining the person responsible standing somewhere just beyond the tree line, watching us scramble. Maybe they were waiting to see if we would stay the night, or maybe they had just wanted to scare us enough to leave. We did not stick around to find out. As soon as the last spare was on, we packed up the essentials and got back on the road. The drive out was tense. The Forest Service road felt darker than it had before. I found myself checking the rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see headlights following us. We did not stop until we reached the highway. Once we were back in an area with cell service, we called the police and the local ranger station. We gave them the exact location of the campsite and the coordinates we had marked. The officer we spoke to told us it was good that we had been armed and warned us to be careful in remote areas. Out there, he said, there was not much they could do unless they caught someone in the act. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I am camping in isolated areas. The worst part is not knowing what the person's intentions were. Maybe they were just trying to scare us. Maybe they were hoping we would be stranded, or maybe they had planned something worse and changed their mind. It is the not knowing that makes it stick in my head. The idea that someone could be close enough to sabotage your only way out without you ever realizing they were there. I have not camped that far out since.